I don't get faith. I don't understand how somebody so smart can be accepting kind of their own belief in that. I don't understand any aspect of it.
Welcome to Cross-Examined, a podcast about confronting difference in good faith. I'm John Inazu, and each episode, my co-host Evan Mandry and I come at a challenging question from different viewpoints and work to understand each other better without giving up on the conversation. In episode 2, we examine faith, exploring what it means to believe and how deep devotion can exist alongside deep difference.
So, John, let's get into a biggie. It was very interesting at your conference. David French was there, and at the final panel, David French, New York Times columnist, Christian, but big supporter of free speech, and went down the line and sort of asked about your hope, and French said he was optimistic and that his faith gave him hope. You were a little more on the fence, I would say.
Well, no, actually, so this is an important point. David and I agree on the difference between hope and optimism. So I share David's confidence and hope in God's plan for the world and that it's all going to work out. And it's why I live my life the way I do. That's different than a kind of contingent optimism, which to me is conditioned on how things are going, how hard is it, how hard might it be, who's suffering. In that sense, I am pretty pessimistic right now in the current political moment. And I also think things can get much worse, and maybe they will get much worse. And there's very little to be optimistic about in that sense. But I am hopeful. Hope for me is fundamentally determined by my location and participation in a much larger story that goes way beyond my lifetime and way beyond the United States of America and unfolds over thousands of generations and culminates in the end of history as redeemed by God. So that's, to me, something to be tremendously hopeful about.
So I guess as directly as I can say, I don't get it. I mean, I wish, to some extent, I did. I think I would feel better. So I shared the first half of what you said. I'm very, very worried about where we are in the United States. I mean, not necessarily thinking that things are going to get better anytime soon. But I just don't have, I think as I understood what you talking about hope, I don't share it. Like, I don't feel any confidence that things will get better. It just seems as likely to me that they'll get worse. And, I think if I could take that pill, I'd just be a much happier person.
But notice this is not a progress narrative. Things may not get better for a long, long time. I don't actually think that Christian hope has anything to do about things getting better. I think what it has to do with is things ending well. And the end could be a long, long time from now. I actually think that a lot of what you find in the Hebrew scriptures is good medicine for hope, in that you learn about the Jewish people being in abject suffering and sometimes disobedience for centuries, right? Generations and generations, but always seeking after ultimately the promises of God and then God's faithfulness over a long, long time. So think about, for example, when the Jews are exiled to Babylon in the book of Jeremiah, and the promise to the people is love the city, God will be faithful, the city and you will prosper and things will work out. But notice about that promise, that's not to any individual. It's not like you, Evan, are going to be in Babylon and it's going to be fine, right? You might die. You might be persecuted. You might suffer tremendously. But to the people, the promise is there is hope and I will be faithful. And to me, that's the ballgame.
Okay, so I understand that as progress isn't a straight line, but we're going someplace better.
We end up someplace better.
We end up someplace better. Okay. I have no such confidence. And I think I would feel differently about the world if I just thought this was like, just a transient state, even if transient meant 10,000 years, that's all right, So where does that come from for you?
I think it's just core to what for me Christian faith is about. I mentioned to you this verse from the New Testament where the Apostle Paul says, if it's just for life that we have hope, if it's just for this world, then pity us beyond all people. I mean, in other words, if my Christian faith isn't true, if at the end of the day Jesus didn't really rise from the dead and change the reality of the world, then what am I doing with my life? Why am I giving my money to my church and my time to different ministries? And why am I foregoing certain opportunities? I actually think that if we took off all of the surroundings, you're just a better person than I am. You're naturally inclined to help people in ways that I might not be. And if it weren't for my faith, I think I'd be a much more self-interested person. I would certainly be spending my money differently. I would be prioritizing my time differently. So hope for me is rooted in this idea that I'm not just living for this life. And what I appreciate and actually really admire about the honesty of your answer is I'm not sure, without that transcendent hope, without the sense that this is not all there is, I don't know why one would be optimistic today.
Right. And I will say, I'm often asked, like, why do I do what I do? And did you say I was a better person than you? Was that me you were talking about?
I think you're a better person.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. I have to. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But I think it's true of both of us. I definitely live a purposeful life. I would say you live a purposeful life. I guess what I've asked myself, or maybe somebody has asked me, is why do I do what I do if I don't have that belief in the end point? But I don't get faith. Like I would say I have faith in nothing. There's nothing I accept without evidence. I'm not even completely sure when I say things with evidence that I'm accurately perceiving the world. And I just try to do the best I can on the information that I have as I understand it. I don't understand how somebody so smart can be accepting kind of their own belief in that. I don't understand any aspect of it. I don't say that judgmentally at all.
Yeah, no, nor do I take it as such. So part of the answer, but I do actually, so I'll give you a partial answer we can come back to, and then I have a question for you. The partial answer is a premise of faith, at least the kind of Christian faith that I understand and believe, is that it's actually not something to understand. I mean, Augustine famously said, I believe and then I understand.
This is Shmuley Augustine?
Exactly. In other words, the premise of this whole thing, there is a God out there. God seeks relationship with us as finite creatures, and then God, through God's action, draws us to belief in a way that I can't fully explain. And then we could talk about things like the movement of the Holy Spirit and these sorts of things. But I come to faith not because I can sit there and logically think through it, but because I would say God in his grace drew me to faith and has drawn billions of other people to faith, and then in my understanding of it, longs for the created order to know him. So there's not a leap of faith because the whole thing is a leap beyond us.
All right, I'm going to ask a bunch.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Spirit draws people to faith, but there's so many different faiths, and some of them have contradictory beliefs. How do you reconcile? How does one reconcile? Okay, I believe something, and another person of faith believes something that's greatly in tension or antithetical.
Yeah, well, so they can't all be right. This is why I think ultimately the pure value pluralists are just wrong. They're wrong philosophically and metaphysically, right? It can't be that everything is right or works out at the end. So there is going to be at some point a right answer, a true and a false. There is an epistemic limit to that, though, that we might not know. I'm not going to be able to prove to you that my understanding of Christianity is the right answer for all time. So I have to trust and have the confidence to live into it. Other people are doing the same. This is why I think, you mentioned in an earlier episode that I'm kind of a pluralist at heart. I am. Like, I think that as finite and imperfect people, we're all kind of doing our best, but doing our best doesn't mean it all ends up in the wash and it's all okay. So we're trying, God is leading us, and I trust that in the fullness of time, God will reveal more and more of his truth.
I don't completely understand, if you believe there's a right answer, how you could be a pluralist, because you must think your answer is the right answer, right?
my answer, as far as I understand it, I think is the right answer. And I would love to persuade other people around me. So here's the thing. I've been asked this question over the years about my theory of pluralism. If everyone in the world came to believe exactly what I did, I don't think that'd be a bad thing. I would love for that, because I actually think I'm right about a lot of things, and I think other people are wrong. Now, I think it's tremendously important that I respect other people's views and that I work and err on the side of persuasion and not coercion, and that other people will come to very different outcomes and understandings than I do. And I'm also flawed in my own ways, including some of my own beliefs, which are surely, if there's one thing I know about the end of time, it's that the sum total of my beliefs will not be completely correlated to truth. I have some things wrong. I don't know what they are. I'm doing my best. You're doing your best. But there is still a truth. And to the extent that I understand what that truth is, I feel compelled to encourage other people toward that truth as best I understand it.
So what if people are pursuing beliefs or acting in faith that you actually think is wrong?
Well, I would say that's true of everybody who's not a Christian.
Sure, but some wrongs will be much more incompatible with some of your core beliefs, right? So some people will perhaps be moving through the world violently, or moving through the world trying to proselytize very aggressively. So does your view of pluralism accommodate those positions?
Well, yeah, I love this question. And the answer is it depends. So I was speaking at Duke a few months ago, and I was doing a bunch of different talks, and one of them was to the religious life staff, the different campus ministers on Duke's campus. And they were talking about the challenges of pluralism and how they work with their respective communities. And at one point, the Jewish rabbi said, I wish that the evangelicals and the evangelical ministers at Duke's campus would just lay off trying to convert the Jewish students. So they show up freshman year at Duke's campus, they're 18 years old. And this rabbi, she was saying, can you not recognize that you're in a pluralistic setting, and it might not be the most helpful thing to a Jewish kid to say, hey, you need, Jesus for eternal life or something like that. And to me, that's a great example of why context matters. So, I think evangelism is an important thing, an important part of faith, but I don't think it's super helpful for Christian kids at Duke to go up to Jewish students and say, here's what you need to know about what's wrong about your faith. I think there's a context and a wisdom to how you engage with other people. I think there are certain active harms perpetuated by certain faiths that I hope the law will constrain, right? If you want to use physical violence against people to advance your cause, I hope the law stops you from doing that. If you want to use your faith as a proxy for political power and manipulation of other people, I hope that the greater polity will defeat you at the polls.
So listening to you, you're very humble, you're very smart, you're very kind, you're not sanctimonious. But I could just imagine somebody else sitting there and their faith. I mean, I hear such people all the time, and they're really, really sure of what they believe. And some of what they believe is, that people who are gay are living, an aberrational, despicable, unnatural life. And then, I start to clench, and it scares me. Uncertainty scares me. So your certainty kind of embraces uncertainty. So it feels fine to me, but I don't know when, the next, and I'm sure we'll talk to some such people, when the next person comes in, their certainty is scary to me.
Well, let me complicate this for me a bit, because I don't want you to think I'm just kind of like the nice, acceptable version of Christianity, because there would be a way in which I could be soft pedaling it. Like, I actually do believe this stuff is true. And I think the implications of my faith have all kinds of consequences for how I live my life, but also for how I would normatively judge how other people are living their lives, right? I think there is a right and a wrong answer to say, what does faithfulness in marriage look like, for example? Or how do you think about the use of violence, either state or non-state violence? I think those have important right answers to them. And some of those answers are going to be incompatible with or in tension with a whole lot of the world, particularly the elite world that I live in higher ed. I'll give you another example here. I think that the dignity of life matters tremendously, such that end of life decisions should and ought to be constrained by the state. And I know that a lot of progressives in my circles have a very different view of that, right? And that, something like the Medical Aid in Dying Act emerging in Canada, I think that's really worrisome and harmful to society. And that view, which I believe comes from my faith, is in direct contrast with a lot of people who I work with, right, and their beliefs. There's a kind of squishy faith that just wants to say, please like me, right? Please accept me, because let me do my thing, and I promise not to offend you or be different than you or make you feel uncomfortable. And that I don't think is Christian faith at all. I think Christian faith is wildly strange and should be strange. Probably, if anything, I don't make it strange enough.
Okay, so I appreciate that you didn't lean into you're the version of Christian that would be most palatable to me and Perry. So that's going to make this conversation much more interesting. So you were alluding to like euthanasia.
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about euthanasia.
Say I said, and boy, this is implausible. Say I had actually read the Old Testament, and I was convinced that God had told me that certain types of mercy killing were mandated, and that I would go to eternal damnation if I failed to assist somebody in pain and ending their life. How could we have a conversation like that if you're sure you're right and I'm sure I'm right, but yet you're a pluralist? I don't get it.
Well, my mind is stuck here because I think you wouldn't be a very good Jew if it was just God told me and therefore that's my belief, right? Because you would detach yourself completely from a tradition of understanding and a community that surrounds you.
I'm not a good Jew in so many regards, so this one is not hypothetical.
But I think, the reason I asked or made that comment is I think this isn't just like about what I think about the world. I insert myself into an ongoing tradition that has unfolded over centuries with a lot of smart people, a lot of careful reflection, and the balance of that tradition comes to a conclusion that is, in this particular example, not super controversial within the tradition. I mean, there are always going to be people who are pushing the tradition to go in one way or another. There are always going to be people you could bring on, our podcast to say, no, I'm a Christian and I think otherwise. But for centuries and around the globe, something like end-of-life killing is not super debated. It's just something that doesn't.
But that line of reasoning, where does that, does that really carry any weight for you? If I had made an equivalent argument about segregation or something like that, well, there are lots of smart, parenthetically white, Supreme Court justices and lawyers who've, said textually the people of color, black people, are 3/5 of a person, and that society is better for this, and we've debated and there's consensus. That would carry no weight with me whatsoever. I don't think it would carry any weight with you.
Yeah, no, it's certainly built into the danger of any kind of tradition-based reasoning is that the tradition itself can go absolutely awry, and then how do you know, right? So you can, this is not, it's not an unfair critique of a McIntyrean position to say, what do you do with bad traditions, right? And you could say certainly that the kind of Christianity that manifested in the antebellum South in the United States was a distorted and deformed version of Christianity that gained sociological, political, and theological traction, right, to great harm. Unavoidable in our discussions when we come to issues of faith are going to be this reliance for me on something that is beyond people, that is transcendence, that is hope that God is guiding this in ways that we don't fully understand. And I would say it's completely understandable if you would look at that and say, that sounds bonkers, right? Or that sounds like a cop-out, or that sounds really unthoughtful. I can see those arguments as well. And I sometimes think them.
And transcendence means
That it's beyond you and me, and even Perry. That it's not about.
it's beyond Perry.
It's not about human understanding or human determinism. That there is a God who is, and particularly when it comes to a Christian understanding of the tradition of the church, that God is guiding the church collectively toward truth.
But I could put another Christian here who would claim the mantle of transcendentalism and argue with values that I would find repugnant. How do I differentiate among claims of knowledge and transcendental truth?
This is just fundamental to any ongoing living tradition, is that its participants continue to argue about the correct interpretation of the tradition in a contingent way that is not fully formed and is yet to be determined. So that person, that hypothetical person whom you mentioned, who's sitting here, who has a different view that you find abhorrent, might persuasively carry the day for the tradition going forward. I certainly hope not, right? I hope and trust that the persuasiveness of the Christian witness over time shows forth a very different reality than a lot of the bad forms that we could all name, including present forms today in 2025 America. But can I prove that? No. Do I know that that's going to win out? No. I mean, it's a hope that I have. And in the meantime, in my limited ability and limited time on the earth, I think what I'm supposed to do is do my best to persuade people that I have the better understanding of what faithful Christian witness looks like today. Okay, I've got a question for you, since this has felt like but I don't want to let you off the hook.
No.
So you were talking earlier in this
Good thing is
discussion-
I'm defending nothing.
Yeah. Well,
Even I can take that case.
tell me. So you said you don't trust anything. You're here doing what you can to, I would say, alleviate suffering and fight injustice and try to make a world a better place. But if none of this is lasting, then who cares? I mean, why? Given your priors, I assume that you believe the earth is more than 6,000 years old.
I do.
As do I. So the earth has been around a long time, right?
Right.
A long, long time. And human beings have been around a long, long time. And you're spending a whole lot of your life and your time and your money to make the experience of life better for people who happen to be living with you today. But we're all gone in a blip. So why not just, I don't know, play more golf or hang out with your kids
Well, I do hang out with my kids a lot. So, I really place a lot of priority on that. So I thought we were going to go, I'll say this. I do kind of have kind of a very vague spiritual belief, but I would say it's spiritual, not dogmatic. I just think all life should be treated with respect.
And is there anything deeper? Is there a why, or is it just sort of an intuition?
This is what my gut says. It just feels right. To the extent I've read anything that clicked with me, it's Buddhist-y stuff. I don't know. You could push me on that. Like, I think to some extent, and I could tell you some reasons why I think I've come to that vague spiritual belief. To some extent, I think it's genetics. To some extent, I just think it's my parents.
Why do you call it spiritual, though? That's intriguing to me. Why not just say, be nice is a pretty good principle?
Yeah, I might say it that way, too. But it feels, I don't know. Are you into music at all?
Probably not the music you like.
Oh, what music are you into?
Well, it's eclectic, like 80s music. And
I like 80s music.
Yeah. It's not, most people would say the music I like is not good music. So, but go ahead with the musical analogy.
So I'm into music a fair amount. My daughter is a really good jazz saxophone player, and I play trumpet. I love music. And like I feel the music, if that makes sense. There's some things that I think are very funny. There's like a rhythm when I write. I say things aloud to myself, and I know that I write very musically. And there's some things that sort of feel in sync. Like you feel in sync to me.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's great. I mean, I agree, and I know what you're describing. But at the end of the day, like the good vibes are just pretty fleeting, right? I mean, if all we are is a bunch of molecules and skin and pain, and then it's over, why call that spiritual at all? I mean, isn't it just kind of seize the day and then it's done?
You mean why shouldn't I just live selfishly?
Well,
I'd feel like crap.
yeah, but then
I selfishly live unselfishly.
well, I think some sort of there are certainly theories of the world that would say all the altruism is just self-interest anyway. Right?
Sure,
It's what we do to feel
I'll own
good.
that.
But then, like, what's the point of the good vibes? Just that we're here for a moment, and you might as well capture as many as you can.
I can't say that there's a point to anything. I mostly share what you said earlier, that I think we're a bunch of molecules and, we exist in this form for some amount of time and then we transition to some other molecular state, and I don't really understand any of it. It just feels better, and to me, just not to be a total asshole than to just live for oneself. I mean, I'm sure I'm a jerk sometimes too, but I feel bad. Like when I do something like that, I try to make it right after the fact. Somebody told me, one of my friends told me I said something to him meanly. This is years ago, and I blocked it out of my mind, and he repeated it to me. And I actually just I shuddered. I felt like I was gonna vomit. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And I just wanted to set it straight. But like even that notion of setting it straight is like, I think there's some balance that I'm trying to restore, but I don't have any confidence in any deeper meaning.
And is there never, so this is a curious point to me that I think in terms of sort of a gulf of empathy or understanding, this is something that's hard for me to access. So would you say there's not a point in life where you are, I'm talking about in the midst of the good vibes, where you just think this is beyond, like, this has to be God?
I've never had a millisecond of such a thought.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the point of this exercise is,
Yeah.
I mean, I respect it. I certainly respect you. And I'm so deeply committed to the First Amendment, every dimension of it. But that just comes kind of from my agnosticism, my uncertainty. I just don't have any belief in any capital T truth. And I have deep skepticism that, if you give people in power the right to decide which little t is the capital T, I know where that's going to end up. So I'm really, really deeply committed to it. But, I've never felt for a second that there was a capital T.
Yeah. Well, and we share the skepticism about little t, truth, and power. But I think the point I'm trying to get at is, watching a sunset over the Rocky Mountains or something like that, where there have been so many moments in my life where I feel so small and so overwhelmed and so grateful for something that's not just a bunch of molecules.
Sure. I've had many moments of joy, gratitude, even dare say hopefulness, but I've always thought it was just a bunch of molecules. So when you look at the institution of religion writ large, do you see it on balance as a force for good?
I do. Yeah, with some huge caveats. And I think the institution of religion has been the cause of tremendous harm and suffering, continues to be so, particularly, I think in 2025 America, we could name lots of examples, but as a force for good over the course of human history, yes, I think human rights and due process and a lot of the things that we take for granted today, parts of democracy, I think owe to the influence of religion and particularly Christianity on Western structures. And I think a lot of that is tremendous good. And the basic restraint of arbitrary violence by structures of law, however imperfect they are. I think these are the alleviation of widespread suffering, which is not to say the elimination of suffering, the ways in which religious institutions have helped made possible unbelievable rescues from dire and awful circumstances. I'm thinking of my friend Gary Haugen, who runs a worldwide organization called the International Justice Mission that is committed to defeating human trafficking and sex trafficking today. And they work with local governments around the world and go in and through the use of law and local prosecutors and local police rescue tens of thousands of sexually trafficked kids motivated by Christian faith. And so that's tremendous good. And I'm right. And there are lots of harms as well.
Yeah. I mean, I on balance see religion as a terribly negative force that's led to violence and exclusion and xenophobia. And I look, if you were the Christian, yeah, the world would be a good place. But I just hear other people claim that mantle of objective truth with equal conviction, but their view of the world is not so tolerant as yours. And even if you're owning that you're not perfectly tolerant and that you have some views that maybe I and maybe Perry might not completely agree with, it feels pretty tolerant to me. I could live in your universe. But a lot of the other versions are really, really scary to me.
Why is it that religious institutions can mobilize in these kinds of ways? And then in the other direction, for all of the harm, suffering, and violence that religious institutions do perpetuate, what about in the last 150 years, the immense human suffering from non-religious political powers? Think of communist China or Stalinist Russia or the Khmer Rouge or other, the massive, massive slaughter of human beings in the name of not religion, but ideology. And then the ways in which in many instances, religion has been a counterforce. The witness of the Catholic Church in Poland against tremendous suffering under communism. So I think it's complicated. Sure. I think it's we can probably all point to our favorite and least favorite institutional examples, but I don't want to say there's a slam dunk argument one way or another. I just think that human institutions have done a lot of deep harm in the world, and some of them have done a lot of good things.
I probably am pretty scared of ideology too. I'm anybody who knows they know scares me. And any institution that is certain scares me. And I just like reason and evidence and humility. I think what's so interesting about this is why I propose this to you and feels equally interesting to me, and I don't feel any less inclined to be your friend because of it, is I genuinely believe what you're saying. And I think you genuinely believe what I'm saying. I actually don't understand. And I always kind of operate from a place of, I think, really deep empathy. I'm doing this project right now. I mentioned it to you briefly when we were walking over. I'm writing an article about the University of Austin, Texas. Not University of Texas at Austin, but the Free Speech University. And I've had occasion to speak with tons of people who have as close to kind of opposite political, valences as I do. I'm utterly fascinated by it. So I interviewed someone, an evolutionary biologist, incredibly smart. And I was off the air, I'm okay, you're the smartest Trump supporter I've ever spoken to. And I just got to understand. And I listened and, I learned, I'm a really big devotee of the framework. I'll put it, Carol Gilligan, the feminist psychologist, has this framework called radical listening. I love just listening. Like, I'm totally interested in what you're saying. And, sometimes I listen and I'm like, okay, I can put myself in that person's brain, and I think this premise is mistaken, but I see how that takes them there. And and I don't get it. I mean, everything else you say, your kind of constitutional orientation, I was like, I really get that. And, your pluralism writing, I really get that. But I listen to this and I'm like, I respect it and I'm interested, but I don't get it. And I think that's what'll make this really interesting is I think, and you said pretty clearly you don't get where I'm coming from. And Perry and I are in the minority on this. I mean, most people have some faith. So I think that's what'll make this really interesting is over time, as we keep exploring issues, like we're going to bring these different instincts and frameworks to it. And, I think it's really, really important to try to understand the other side.
Cross-Examined is hosted by Evan Mandery and John Inazu. This podcast was produced and edited by me, Olivia Schroeder. Today's episode was produced by Perry Wilson and Allison Smith. Music by Nathan Eklund and James Bawley.